the benefits of like you get like most of the good things without most of the bad things, and like we can kind of solve a lot of the problems that we've been having even in like our mainstream kind of society, just but without sacrificing important things like privacy. But for those things to actually happen, you need to actually just build up this ecosystem where people do have these claims about themselves, kind of just published or available in some cryptographic form. And I think the crypto space can do a lot in bootstrapping that, but also a lot of that involves kind of cooperating with all these different institutional actors and trying to kind of get them on board. So I guess I see it as this kind of sprawling collection of a lot of these different efforts, right? So you have grassroots adoption of payments, you have institutional adoption of payments, you have grassroots adoption of ENS, you have institutional adoption of kind of making these kinds of certifications, you have all of these different systems for proving that you're a unique human or proving properties about yourself. You have a kind of some zero knowledge proof layer for actually proving all of these things. And we can, I think, and then there's also a lot of these kind of niche applications like there's prediction markets, which have been really successful and have been used a lot even just in the 2020 election, for example. There's I even saw there was this independent news site, Popula, that's writing a lot of articles, and a lot of them, cover the developing world and Africa. And they have like Ethereum, like ETH for tipping, and an Ethereum-based comment system, which I thought was really cool. So I think we'll also see just a lot of small things kind of popping up, and it's an ecosystem and it's a network, and just you have all of these different parts that just grow independently, and they kind of all mutually support each other.
It's awesome.
It's awesome.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we just scratched the surface here, really. That was with that kind of foundation of a scalable blockchain and privacy and usability aspects that you mentioned around multi-sig and all that stuff. It's like it could transform the world in a way that we're just beginning to see the very beginnings of it. So awesome. That's a very compelling vision of the future. And we're just about out of time, actually. We probably have like 1 minute left, but I wanted to ask you one final question, which was more of a personal one, just for fun. But you became kind of this global celebrity at a pretty young age, having invented Ethereum, and the Ethereum community has this very unique culture with like memes and unicorns and rainbows and stuff like that, and cats. Did that kind of come from your personality? And I guess maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight into how that came to be and what your life how your life turned out as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like it's definitely a kind of combination of the kind of cultural values of both myself and some of the other kind of people in Ethereum that were there early on, like basically just kind of don't take life too seriously, and don't like definitely you kind of don't be aggressive and gruff like some of the maximalists on Twitter are. Just like not being that is definitely one of the, and kind of being very clear to the world that we're not that was definitely some part of the motivation. Just being kind of open and welcoming, I think, is a really important kind of value, and kind of represents what crypto is about for a lot of us. It's it's definitely kind of turned into a very interesting aesthetic, and we love our unicorns and our cats now, and it's kind of everywhere in DEF CON, and I know, and I think the goal is definitely to kind of make people feel welcome and to just like be as friendly as we can, and to just like remind ourselves about the lighter side of life, I guess. So I hope it's been succeeding.
Yeah, I think it has, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's very important for the world, and hopefully we at Coinbase and the rest of the community can figure out a way to help and help go create the crypto economy, more economic freedom in the world, and all the things that this can do. So thank you so much for the time, Vitalik. I appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see each other again soon.
Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, alrighty. Have a good day. Bye.
Yeah,
Welcome everybody to our fireside chat. We have a very special guest here today, Vitalik Buterin, and he and I were just catching up. We've known each other for a little while. So Coinbase started back in 2012, and I remember we were reading lots of Bitcoin magazine at that time, and I remember reading some articles written by this guy named Vitalik, and I think thought his writing was excellent. And in 2013, we actually met for the first time at the Bitcoin conference in San Jose, California. And I think shortly thereafter, Vitalik was, I remember he was thinking about moving to the US or coming to San Francisco or something like that, but I guess he couldn't get a work visa. While he was kind of stranded in Canada, he decided to create Ethereum. So in like a weird way, the immigration policy of the United States led to the creation of Ethereum. Vitalik is born in Russia, moved to Canada when he was age 6, and eventually went on to co-found Ethereum, and he's been one of the most prolific and influential voices in crypto. So Vitalik, thank you for being here. We're glad to have you.
Thank you for inviting me, Brian. It's good to be here.
Awesome. So, to get started, maybe you can give people just a little bit of a lay of the land of what's the current state of the Ethereum Foundation, and how have you set it up over time and your role? And then, maybe once we get through that, we can get into a little bit about some of the more recent developments with ETH2 and Serenity.
Sure. So the Ethereum Foundation was originally created in the middle of 2014. So at the time, we were somewhere around 20 or 30 different, basically core developers that were just working on trying to make the original Ethereum protocol happen. And there were a lot of people in Europe, like Berlin was a major center at the time, a lot of developers there, some people in London, some people in the US, and a lot of different places. And so at the beginning, it was basically just this kind of collection of legal entities in a couple of countries, the main one in Switzerland, and just trying to pay developers and make the Ethereum protocol happen. I think since then, it's definitely expanded a lot. So around the beginning of 2018, we started and announced this big grant program. And we really try to expand into, not just kind of paying core developers ourselves, but also just supporting all of these different independent projects in the community. And since then, the grant program actually spends more money than the foundation does on kind of paying its own people, which I think in part is a kind of deliberate choice to encourage a more kind of distributed and diverse ecosystem. One of the big recipients of that is just all these different independent teams that are building Ethereum 2 clients. So Prismatic, Lighthouse, and Nimbus are 3 of the biggest ones. Also, some Layer 2 projects, some Ethereum developer experience things, Ethereum community things, security related things, and this kind of big long list. And I think it's just a kind of remit is just support things that are good for the Ethereum ecosystem and support things that are good for making the Ethereum ecosystem good for the world. And so whatever fits into that, the foundation is kind of happy to do. So our executive director, kind of Ayami Aguchi, she is definitely kind of a bit behind the scenes more than some of our core developers, but she and Josh, Sina, and our Bastian, and Albert, many of our other kind of ops staff have been doing a very good job of just making that happen and kind of managing this transition where we changed from this kind of small entity that we were back when Ethereum started to this kind of big sprawling thing that's managing a huge amount of relationships and resources. So that's basically where the foundation is. It's a very globally distributed organization. We have major bases in, I guess, Switzerland, Singapore, Taipei, Berlin, Denver, San Francisco. And sometimes that just means there's a couple of people there. Sometimes it means there's a small office, and sometimes people go there, sometimes people don't. And otherwise, it's basically as global as Ethereum is. That's who we are.
Awesome. And so those people you're referring to, they're employees of the Ethereum Foundation who
Mhm.
are helping. Do I understand it correctly that the foundation really is defining the spec, the protocol, and then they're also a grant making organization to those various teams that you mentioned that are implementing the spec and building node software? Is that right?
And I could kind of quickly go through the list actually of just what the
Yeah.
Ethereum Foundation funds directly and what it funds with grants. So directly, there is obviously just operations of the Ethereum Foundation itself. Then there is DevCon, our annual conference. There is the research team. So that's mainly the team building the Ethereum 2 specs. It used to be the team building Ethereum 1 specs until that process kind of distributed a lot over the last couple of years. There's the people building Solidity. Also, there's a lot of just smaller different projects. So, like for example, we have a Python team that's been working on the Ethereum Python implementation. There's just a lot of different teams working on different individual projects. Geth is definitely a really big and important one. And then as far as what we do with grants, the Ethereum 2 clients, so I mentioned Prism from Prismatic, Lighthouse from Sigma Prime, and Nimbus from the status team, those all receive a combination of support from the Ethereum Foundation and support from other organizations in the Ethereum ecosystem. There is a lot of layer 2 projects have received grants of different sizes from the Ethereum Foundation, especially early on. Some applications, and even like Uniswap started with a grant, actually, and then gets turned into this really big thing. Academic grants, so we gave quite a bit to the Center for Blockchain Research in Stanford. I gave quite a bit to IC3. Also gave quite a bit to Starkware to work on some Stark-related tech that we might end up using at some point. And after that, there's just this really big long tail.
Makes sense. That's awesome. Well, it certainly has sparked a pretty incredible ecosystem of different projects, and we can get into DeFi and all those things in a little bit. But maybe I think I'll ask a question that's on a lot of people's minds, which is how are things progressing towards Ethereum 2 and Serenity? And maybe you can give us a timely update for the community on how you feel it's going. And yeah, what should we know?
Sure. So Ethereum 2 is this big, sprawling effort to mainly make two upgrades to Ethereum. One of them is switching the consensus from proof of work to proof of stake, which we believe to be much more energy efficient, much less tree killing, require much less issuance and all of those things, and at the same time, more secure than proof of work. So this is actually something I wrote a blog post about, like one of the most recent ones on vitalik.ca talks about this. And the other big piece is sharding, which is a scalability upgrade. That basically means that you don't need every node to process every transaction anymore. You kind of split up the load much more, and this way we could increase the blockchain's throughput from around 15 transactions a second to many thousands or tens of thousands of transactions per second. So the Ethereum 2 roadmap is split into different stages or parts. I mean, we at the beginning called them phases. I think recently we've been de-emphasizing the phase branding a bit because it's becoming kind of more parallelized, and all the pieces are being built in a kind of they can be implemented when they're ready, regardless of what the other pieces are doing kind of format. But the very first phase 0, this is the launch of the proof of stake beacon chain, basically just a proof of stake chain, just maintaining consensus on itself, running kind of independently from, but hooking into the ETH1 blockchain. This is something that, from a technical perspective, is basically just completely ready, and it is out there, right? Like the thing that it's waiting for is that right now there is this contract on the Ethereum blockchain called a deposit contract, where people can send in 32 ETH in order to become Ethereum validators, and basically to once the amount of people, or once the amount of ETH in the contract reaches 524,000, then the beacon chain kind of officially kicks off, right? So right now I think it's at about 100,000, and it's basically just sitting there for more people to stake. So once that number gets above 500, then the chain launches, which is really exciting. And so we see this proof of stake system running as a main network for the first time. Obviously it's been running as a test network quite successfully for several months. So after that phase 0, the next major pieces of work are, and there's a lot of like minor improvements we want to make that we wants to make now that we just couldn't fit into the spec in time. So light client support, some efficiency improvements, some other things. But then there's also sharding, and the other big piece is the piece that we call the merge, or we sometimes call docking, which basically just means taking the entire ETH1 system and actually moving it on top of the ETH2 layer. And so we would basically get rid of proof of work, right? And kind of actually bring the ecosystem back into being this one chain that's entirely based on a proof of stake. So that's something that we're excited about, but it'll have to be a bit longer, because not only does the merge have to be implemented, but the community has to be confident in the merge process. The community has to be confident in the Ethereum 2 chain itself. And so that will take some time, abandon the $50 billion base layer that they know and love and move to one that we consider better. But it's still a leap that people have to take, and we want to be mindful of people's desire to take that leap confidently and not too rashly. So that's kind of what's happening on the ETH2 side in the future. At the same time, there is also work happening on layer 2 scaling. So rollups have been all the rage over the last year or so. And rollups are this kind of interesting hybrid layer 2 technique. So we've been looking into layer 2 for a long time, right? We've been doing state channel work, which is kind of similar to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. We've been doing work on Plasma. Rollups are this interesting compromise where, unlike other layer 2 schemes, they do require a little bit of data on chain. They require about 16 bytes of data on chain for every transaction, which is basically just like a highly compressed version of who's sending it, who's the recipient. Basically just the information needed to reconstruct the state, but not any signatures or any of the information needed to verify things. And it turns out that if you have that, then you can build a layer 2, which is much kind of conceptually simpler, and it allows general purpose smart contracts. It's extremely powerful. You don't have to learn a new paradigm or learn a new language. It basically just behaves like almost a carbon copy of the Ethereum base layer itself, right? And so we've been really actively working on that. There are some great teams like Optimism, Arbitrum, Loopring, ZK Sync, Aztec, all these people trying to make rollups happen. And rollups by themselves can increase Ethereum scalability from around 1,000 transactions, from around 15 transactions a second to around 1,000 to 4,000 transactions a second, depending on how complex the transaction is. And so they're actually enough to provide quite a bit of scaling to the Ethereum ecosystem by itself. And rollups have already been tested on mainnet, right? So like the Loopring rollup is running on mainnet, the ZK Sync rollup is running on mainnet, Gitcoin has moved over to the ZK Sync rollup that's on mainnet, but we want to have more adoption of that over time. And then if you take rollups and sharding at the same time, then the scalability increases from both of those multiply, and so you'll be able to go up to around 100,000 transactions a second, which is roughly the scale that we need to basically be comfortable saying, yes, this is a platform that's ready for kind of powering significant chunks of the world economy. And if we need more, we can just get more over time, just from just Moore's law and various technical optimizations that we know are going to happen.
Yeah. Well, we can talk more about that, because I'm very excited about scalability, and I think that's one of the big unlocks for this industry. But maybe before we get to that, how do you think about, what's the time frame that you think, in your best estimate, that we will now be live on ETH2, we'll have proof of stake, we'll have the scalability, the optimistic rollup, and all those things that you feel like would deliver the next level. So when do you think that'll happen? Best guess.
So ZK rollups, as I mentioned, they're here already. It's just an ecosystem challenge of when they get implemented and widely adopted. Optimistic rollups, so ZK rollups can support payments and like a couple of other applications. Optimistic rollups can support the full EVM more easily. So those are already on testnet. I'm expecting them to be on mainnet, somewhere between 1 to 3 months from now, depending on how lucky the implementation teams are and how many snags they run into. ETH2 beacon chain, obviously extremely soon. There's literally 0 things that need to be done by us. It's just a matter of when people deposit and when that number gets up to 500,000. The Ethereum sharding, like, I don't know, 1 to 1.5 years, and then the merge probably like 1 to 2 years or so. I guess we're
Right.
roughly hoping. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Well, obviously that'll be an incredible moment for the crypto industry, and I'm curious, how do you think about it inside the Ethereum Foundation? I know that there's a number of different kind of, I call them like next generation blockchains, right? People are working on, and we've got Dfinity and Polkadot and Cosmos and Algorand, and ETH2 is one of those. Do you all think about it as kind of, I think, and by the way, I think many of us were probably hoping that something this year would have been launched. Some of those did launch, but we haven't seen maybe as much progress as people were hoping. But these are hard problems; they take a long time. So, do y'all inside the Ethereum Foundation think of it as like we're in a race to kind of do this, or is it more like safety and good process, and it's more like taking our time? I'm just curious how you all think of it internally.
And I think getting it to having a successful, blockchain with good features and good adoption is not just a matter of tech. It's also a matter of like ecosystem and community. And I mean, even like Ethereum itself kind of suffers from this a little bit. If you look at the ZK rollups, right? Like the ZK rollups, they're technologically great. It's amazing tech. It exists now. It exists on mainnet. And so the Ethereum blockchain today is fully technically capable of processing, 4,000 payments a second if people are up to it. But ZK rollups are, they're getting some adoption, but it has been a fairly slow climb. And the reason for that is basically that it's not just the tech that needs to get out the door. It's also just people needs to actually go and implement it. Wallets needs to go and support it. And people needs to adjust their workflows for it. People need to get used to it and all of these things. And so like one of the trends that we've been seeing both in the Ethereum L2 space and even in the kind of quote ETH killer space is that a lot of them are basically trying to adopt the EVM, right? Like a lot of the ETH killers are trying, like maybe a few years ago, they were marketing about how they were so much better than the EVM, and now they're basically marketing about how they're including the EVM. And even the Ethereum Layer 2 projects, right? Like the reason why people are excited about optimistic rollups so much more than Plasma or Channels or even the ZK family, for example, is because they can just support existing EVM contracts, right? So I think like we've learned from this, and one way of describing kind of the EVM or the Ethereum Foundation's posture about this is it's this very pragmatic one of how can we get to things that concretely improve the experience for just existing developers in their existing positions, right? So if someone already has an Ethereum dApp that they're working on, like how quickly can we get to a point where we provide something that just provides concrete value for them, right? And optimistic rollups are one way of making this happen. I mean, some of the non-scaling related things that we're doing around proof of stake or even just developer wallet experiences are another example. Tornado Cash is a great example on the privacy side. It just is like it's not an ecosystem, it's a tool. And I think that's an important lesson. Like everyone really wants to be the king of their own ecosystem, but you can often be the most useful by just building a tool and being okay with being a tool. And Tornado Cash is just a tool, and it's getting a lot of usage, which has been great for the past year. So the challenge that I see on the ETH2 killer side is basically that most of them they do kind of underestimate the value of a community, and they're trying to get their community to some extent, but the problem is just that like the message that you need to have in order to get an excellent community is not just we have great tech, right? Like you have to have a story around why your platform is unique and valuable, and you need to have a way for this applications on your platform to be able to kind of interoperate with all of the existing applications. You need to find like basically have a way to help your people who are on your platform actually get users. And if all of those users are people who are used to using the EVM and who have their existing MetaMask wallets, then like, how are you actually going to make that happen? So there's a lot of those kinds of challenges that I think a lot of the people that just went and said, oh, hey, yeah, we got a $200 million ICO and we hired some PhDs or some Facebook employees and we can go build a technically better chain, like don't necessarily realize. And I think they're starting to realize it now. But then even within the Ethereum ecosystem itself, right, like we've been seeing more and more how kind of tech is not the only challenge. And so those are the things that we've been kind of struggling with. So yeah, and I think in terms of orientation, it really is just a matter of like, hey, how do we take like, not only build these tools, but actually get to the point where users of specific applications and people who are actually in the Ethereum ecosystem that exists can benefit from the much better experiences that the newer technology offers.
Yeah, makes sense. And I do feel like there's so many new blockchains that got created at one point, and usually when industries are first starting, there's kind of massive fragmentation, tons of different competitors, and then over time they consolidate down. And so, I don't. Do you anticipate there'll be any kind of like mergers or acquisitions or something like that of these different blockchains to bring some of these teams together as the industry consolidates?
That's a fun one. We haven't seen like a coin or merger before, right? Like
Yeah.
I guess the challenge is that just requires a lot of coordination, and it's a type of coordination that the teams or that decentralized communities are not naturally good at. But maybe someone will do it successfully and show people the way. Again, I think even within the Ethereum ecosystem, there's definitely like families of projects that could easily do better if they kind of combined into a single one.
Yeah.
Um, on the on the ETH killer side, like one thing that I do foresee happening is I imagine some of them are going to continue to try to pivot from being ETH killers to being kind of ETH satellites. So basically, I mean, some of them are doing this already, right? Like they're talking about how, oh, we have this amazing system and we have a bridge and it's like right beside the Ethereum ecosystem and you can bounce back and forth. And if you want to be a more secure ETH satellite, then you can become a rollup, and the tools for being a rollup are going to become kind of much easier over time. And then you benefit from kind of Ethereum's security layer, which would be nice. And so I do see kind of some portion of them going down that path, and some portion are definitely going to just try building their own ecosystem, and they're going to specialize in doing something unique and interesting that Ethereum does not do. And I think like those are the most interesting ones, right? Like don't just try to become a clone and have 10% better developer experience or whatever. Like either do something that the Ethereum community is not willing to do. That could mean, having a base layer with very activist governance that does things like, protocol changes and like DAO forks and having built-in price feeds and oracles or whatever, and just like throw the entire kitchen sink on like a big governance blockchain. It could mean doing something interesting with formal verification, like like the Tezos vision, for example, like I thought was interesting in that regard. Doing something interesting in terms of like aiming to zero knowledgeify the entire thing, like what Mina has been doing. So those kinds of projects, I think, are interesting and can survive. But basically, like I think, if you're something other than Ethereum, you need to have a story for why your thing deserves to kind of exist and be used in the context of an ecosystem where Ethereum and where it's going already exists. And I mean, that's true of Ethereum as well, right? Like Ethereum itself needed to have a story of why Ethereum deserves to exist in the context of where Bitcoin was and where Bitcoin is going, and that's something where I think we have actually managed to kind of get over that hump. So I mean, I'm confident there will be some projects that manage to do it.
Okay, cool. And what advice would you have, or requests would you have for companies like Coinbase or other crypto companies to help this transition happen to sharding and proof of stake and scalability and Serenity and everything? Like, yeah, what would you prioritize or ask companies to do?
I mean, one thing that I think you've already been doing is kind of taking rollups seriously and trying to be active in having support for them. So, I know you're doing that integration with Optimism, right? And so, just staying in touch with the rollup ecosystem and making sure that kind of you're part of the solution in terms of getting those projects adopted and getting scaling actually happening on those projects is one big thing that I mean both you and kind of companies in general can do. Otherwise, again, can just being an easy to use gateway into the crypto ecosystem is something that's very important and something that we continue to need. Um, right, like if someone is not in the crypto ecosystem now, like how can they get in? How can they buy like either a small amount of crypto just so they can use some applications, or a larger amount of crypto? How having even just having an easy to use wallet is definitely a big part of this, and having a kind of easy access to all of that infrastructure. Um, going kind of Yeah, and so I guess just in a lot of cases, the answer is sort of continue to be good at doing what you do, and
Yeah.
continue to kind of stay abreast of all of these improvements happening in the ecosystem, whether it's layer two scaling or it's privacy related things, whether it's staking, or like smart contract wallets, or whatever, and to make sure that you're in participating in those things. And actually, I know like Coinbase on the, I haven't looked into this in a while, but on the Bitcoin side, like you have a multi-sig wallet where Coinbase holds one of the keys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and do you have that on the Ethereum side yet?
Yeah, we have, well, I think you're referring to our Vault product.
Yes.
Well, we also have Coinbase Wallet, which is a user-controlled, self-custody wallet. So
Right.
um, both. We have that for ETH on both sides. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think like having an a kind of hybrid, like different forms of hybrid custody, like is definitely something that I'm interested in. Like
Mhm.
I've been a shill for multi-sig ever since, and even back in 2013 when I wrote a Bitcoin Magazine article about it. Social recovery have been a big booster over the last couple of years. So having more custody models that kind of combine the benefits of kind of most of what you want out of self-sovereignty with most of what you want out of models that make sure you don't lose your funds if your house burns down, and or you accidentally misplace that piece of paper that has like those $24 million words on it. I think is really important. I mean, in addition to kind of having your own wallet that supports different custody models, the other thing we could do is try to be a kind of in basically general purpose kind of institutional custody oracle. And so the idea would be like some service where you are part of a multi-sig, like basically you like users would be able to kind of sign up and create an account, and if they control an account, they would be able to control like actions with that key, and you would authenticate them using standard kind of ways you would authenticate users, and if things screw up, you can always KYC them and so forth. And that would be done in such a way that it would integrate with other multi-sig wallets. It would integrate with it could be a social recovery guardian, like something like, plug into Argent, for example. Like basically just to make it something generic and even participate in the standardization kind of process for kind of generic kind of custody oracles like that to exist. Like
Mhm.
that would be one interesting example of something you could do on the smart contract side. And in general, I think like getting more adoption of just smart contract wallets and these better custody wallets is like something that's been fairly high priority for me personally. So any
Great.
steps in that direction are excellent steps. Hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's probably a lot more we could do on that side. Coinbase Wallet is our main investment in that space, and we'd love to try some more like social recovery type options and various multi-sig like key storage options. Like we offer some today, but I think giving more options there would be even better. I guess just zooming out for a minute, I think one thing I think about a lot, and I think you do too, is just how do we get crypto to be used by a billion people every day, right? How do we get it to be internet scale? And I think there's a lot of lessons from the internet, right? We talked about one of them already. The move from dial-up to broadband is kind of the scalability that we talked about earlier with sharding and proof of stake and everything, roll-ups. There was also, of course, privacy had to be added to the internet, right? So it went from HTTP to HTTPS, and then you could start putting in your credit card and feel more secure online. And then I'd say the usability was another big piece where like they went from just IP addresses, machine readable addresses to the DNS system, so you could type a human readable name, a domain name. And I know like the Ethereum name system has started doing some work there. Maybe you can just zooming out, kind of give us your vision for the next 5 years in crypto or 10 years. Like, how do we get a billion people using this every day?
So, I mean, as you mentioned, scalability, I think, is a hugely important part of this. And I have a feeling that a lot of people still underestimate that, right? Because I think they might perhaps think of scalability as being, going from Ethereum as it exists today with all the properties that it has today to basically that same thing, but being able to be used by 100 times more people. But the reality is, right, that if we have that scaling, then a lot of other things are going to happen as well. So like one example of this is the thing that like people in Bitcoin land call the fidelity effect, right? That there's like big companies that would love to do major things in crypto, but they're holding off now because they realize that like if they were to do that, then they themselves would basically like single-handedly triple transaction fees and essentially just make their own product useless just by existing. And so if either scalability happens or scalability gets to the point where there's a credible story that it will happen within a year, then I think there's a much higher chance that we're going to see large enterprises just jump in and start doing useful things on chain as a result. So that's one side of things. And then the other side of things, I think, is that if we can push transaction fees down from the status quo where they're like somewhere between, 10 cents and $10, depending on which day of the week and like what thing it is that you're doing, down to the point where they're between, 0.05 cents and 5 cents, then we can unlock a lot more different kinds of activity, right? So we can unlock a lot of non-financial applications. We can unlock a lot more usage of ENS. We can unlock a lot more kind of micropayment related things. Even just like simple consumer to merchant payments starts to kind of become viable again in a way that they're not in many smaller cases today. And so when that happens, like it just opens the door for kind of the organic adoption that we were hoping for back in 2013 to kind of start happening again. Now, obviously, the actual kind of ecosystem development work on making that happen needs to happen as well. But once we have scaling, that becomes possible. Once we have privacy, a lot of things become more possible. And also scaling and privacy work together, right? Because privacy, unfortunately, comes with the cost that privacy preserving transactions are like 10 to 30 times more expensive than regular transactions. Like if you look at Tornado Cash, withdrawals take $10 or like some like crazy high amount. And so not many people are going to use it except for things that like really, really need privacy. And if those fees go down to 10 cents, then, privacy can become much more mainstream, which would be awesome. So that's a big side of things. And then the other side, I think like wallet security, once again, is really important for scaling because like people are just not going to, mass adopt this kind of write 24 words on a piece of paper, and if that paper accidentally goes in the garbage, then so do your life savings kind of approach, right? Like it's like you're just not going to be able to convince like 1.5 billion people to kind of go figure out how to use that entire path. And I know, even among my own friends, like they find that entire procedure scary, and there's a lot of edge cases that they find scary, like even things like, oh, it turns out that there's multiple formats for how to use a seed phrase. And is your BIP32 derivation path like, 42010, or is it 4201000, or whatever the numbers are? And one person I know actually was moved their funds into a different wallet and was really worried that they lost $200,000 until like I kind of went in and did some Python monkeying manually and managed to get the private key out. So like this is what like this goes back to the discussion about like multi-sig and social recovery. But like even just like social recovery is a thing that already exists, right? Like WeChat uses social recovery, for example, to help recover your account. Like a lot of services uses it, and actually is really intuitive and it works well, right? Because like people are comfortable with the idea of like, oh, like put in some contacts that are some people that I know, and I kind of collectively trust this collection of them. So finding kind of security models that combine, I guess, the best virtues of moving away from a centralized kind of single institution controls everything world, together with the virtues of approaches that are actually good for people's user experiences, is another thing that's important for adoption, and for adoption not leading to disasters, I guess. And then the other challenges, of course, like getting to the point where we have like specific applications that a lot of people wants to actually use and benefit from, right? And I guess in the crypto space, obviously just savings and payments are kind of the original one, and they're this big thing that's definitely valuable to a lot of people. Again, if you're in one of these countries that's experiencing hyperinflation, then crypto is really valuable for you. And even if you don't want to like hold money in crypto specifically, or in Bitcoin or ETH specifically, like there's DAI and there's USDC and there's all of these assets that you can use as well. Payments are used, and international payments, crypto continues doing those really well. So and in general, kind of I think the decentralized finance space is increasing the potential for what you can do there. And the challenge with DeFi, I think, is that it's this weird kind of combination of, on the one side, useful but boring things, and on the other side,